we are again.
Here we are.
Another edition of The Rant at Light Beer, Dark Money. I'm Chris Clements.
And I'm Sean Noble. And this is the flagship episode of what are we calling this? Questions with Avery?
We're calling this Deep Thoughts with Avery the intern.
Welcome, Avery.
So, I mean, for those who don't know, we record this at Canyon Ventures at Grand Canyon University, and we're really honored and pleased to do so that they give us this ability to do this. And we've highlighted some of the businesses here, but also we've been able to bring on an intern to help us out with some social media and some other branding exercises.
Right.
Her name is Avery. And so we thought of this idea of, now that she's been with us for a couple weeks and seen what we're doing and what we're talking about, that maybe she has some questions.
Yeah.
And we have no idea what she's going to ask.
Nope.
Buckle up. I'm excited. Thank you guys for having me. It's fun to be able to ask you some questions. I'm glad, Sean, you said there's no such thing as stupid questions because I might ask some of those, but I'm excited to get into it.
There are no stupid questions.
No stupid questions. Keep saying that.
Okay.
I kind of wanted to pick your brains and just get a little bit more insight and wisdom on life. Obviously, the idea of this podcast is faith, freedom, and free enterprise. So I kind of wanted to poke into that a little bit more and just get some more wisdom from you both. So I guess my main first point is I am currently a senior at GCU. And I just kind of wanted to ask some questions in regards to if you were in my shoes, knowing what you know now in the world of faith, freedom, and free enterprise and just life, kind of like what would you have done differently if you were a senior in college and you could go back and tell yourself some things? So maybe go into specifically different areas with faith, if you could go back and look at your faith journey, and would you have changed anything starting out? Would you have sought out some different mentorship, advice, gone different places with faith? I guess we can start there.
Yeah. So that question brings me way back to memories of feeling a bit out of sorts in my faith at the University of Southern California, where I went and I studied political science, initially studying business. And I was, as I've shared in other podcasts, I was kind of raised Heinz 57, grew up in the Episcopal Church, and going to USC, I was exposed to folks at Campus Crusade, and which is now called Cru, and I didn't really understand what it was. I didn't understand what they were talking about, this guy Jesus, and how you could have this intimate relationship with Jesus. You didn't have to necessarily go to church per se. You could actually come to a Bible study or come to a gathering and sing praise songs and have coffee afterwards. And so at that time, the guy who was leading Cru and I would meet periodically. And I was always hesitant to just dive right in and sort of surrender to those ideas, because I was so into, what box you're in. So what team are you on? Are you on the Catholic team? Are you on the Episcopal team? I was kind of into my team at that point, but I wasn't living that out by any stretch of the imagination. I was in a fraternity, and I was, having fun living my fraternity life. But what was really interesting about that is that I had a lot of fraternity brothers who became born again during that time, born again Christian. I had no idea what that meant. Had no clue. I knew nothing about the passage in John where he says to Nicodemus, you have to become born again. That was not taught to me when I was a kid. And so I was really intrigued by that transformation. I mean, these were guys that, for all intents and purposes, drinking, using drugs, womenizing, and they find Jesus and they just go in a different direction. I'm like, well, what is that all about? How does that work?
Yeah.
And so I think that began my exploration of that, more deeply, and wanting to know more and wanting more knowledge about how does that transformation take place?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I didn't really grasp that too much later in life. And so I guess I wish I had. I wish I had really dove into. I mean, God was working on me then, and with a lot of folks coming around me and wanting me to come to Bible study and wanting me to come to crew events and wanting me to be active in that faith environment. And I didn't do it. And I didn't really start exploring that until I moved out to Washington, D.C., where I started hanging out with my friend John Desser and a lot of folks who were involved in some fellowship out there. And then I started understanding, oh, okay, this is what it means. And started trusting it a little bit more. But in college, I didn't trust it. And I'm disappointed in myself on that.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. It's an interesting question. For me, I was pretty firm in my faith at that point. As we discussed in our podcast on the episode on the faith journey, my faith journey has been kind of opposite of Chris's a little bit, because I got married very young. I'd gone on a church mission and then started school, got married between my freshman and sophomore year. I was 21 years old.
Ooh.
So I started school late because of going on a mission. So by the time I was a senior, I had a kid. I'd taken time off to run John Shattuck's first campaign. So I was working in the congressional office during my senior year. So I had a very unconventional college experience, at least by most standards. So
Were you living in student housing and married and
didn't live in student housing. I just
You didn't?
live in apartments.
just living in an apartment?
Yeah. So I wouldn't be able to give you very, very good advice, other than my advice to kids these days is do not get married while you're in college. Wait until you're at least in your mid to late 20s at the very earliest,
Yeah.
preferably 30-ish.
Yeah.
Because there's just so much that changes. I mean, I was a completely different person from when I got married to when I graduated from college.
Yeah. I think that's
It
good
was just
advice.
completely different. And that had its own pitfalls, as evidenced by the failure of the marriage over the course of a number of years. So,
Yeah. Yeah, that's super insightful. I think it's interesting how both of you kind of mentioned there's been like distinct almost people in your lives that have influenced that faith journey too. Like Chris, you said when you're in college, you witnessed people, even though at the time you didn't necessarily go all in for faith, you still observed people having that change and that influenced you. And whether you knew it or not, it seems like there was kind of seeds planted there where you're like, whoa, their life was completely different after that. And they're like, that's not the same person that I knew. So that kind of brings me to another question in regards to faith specifically. Who have been maybe your most influential people in your life in terms of faith, whether that's somebody that, I know you guys have different faith journeys, but who's kind of pushed you in certain directions?
So I have a two-part answer.
Okay.
I would say that my grandfather has been a huge influence. Now, he was not a person of faith necessarily. He was, I think he was raised Lutheran, but was not really a believer, and never really was his whole life. But he was the complete opposite of what I was taught non-believers were, right? Non-believers were evil.
Yeah.
That there was something wrong. I mean, he was the kindest, most generous, most lovable, most loving human being that I ever knew. I mean, he had a profound influence on who I am and how I view the world optimistically, seeing the best in people first. He never judged. He took people, the best of them and made it better. But he wasn't a person of faith. So he was someone that I would continually hearken back to as I went through my faith journey, saying, well, wait, Grandpa Stein was amazing. He was so much love and generosity. And then I think when it came to my faith and my faith journey, I think the most important influence was my mission president. And for people who are not LDS, when you go on a mission, you're 19 years old, and it's a crazy time to be, isolated from your family, and you don't date, and you don't, it's very strict, right? And there's the mission president, who's usually someone who's either retired or very successful in their career, and they take 3 years off to go run a mission. And in this case, I was in Indiana, and his name is Richard Corey, and he was just a giant of a man in the sense of profound relationship with Jesus Christ and an insane ability to look right into you and know exactly what you needed to hear.
Yeah.
So anyway, those are the two.
Well, I think in our podcast about our faith journey, I touched on my grandmother, Patricia, Grandma Pat, and she absolutely, when I was younger, like drilled into me this idea of Jesus and who he was and what role he should play in my life. And she signed every birthday card with scripture. She would, it was everything to her. And her family too, her sisters who I got to know. I mean, we used to make fun of them because they were so into, their Jesus, and we just knew they were coming from that perspective.
Jesus freak.
Yeah, yeah. And but when she passed away in her bed with her Bible by her side.
Wow.
And at 92, and that's just, to me, that's everything. Like, I hope that when God decides to take me, that's what he does. Bible by my side, read it for the evening, and go. So I think that's one. But I think my formative years, where I really started exploring faith and exploring Jesus and wanting to live out my faith, for me, music has been a guiding force in living out faith, praise. In fact, I always, I'm very critical when I go to church about the praise band and who's on, who's not, who's in tune, and I have an ear for that. And so when I was a kid, we didn't have, like right now you have all this Christian contemporary music to choose from. Back in 1980, 81, 82, you did not. I mean, you just didn't have a lot to choose from. But there was a band that we all started listening to when I was about 11 or 12. And they were this little tiny garage band out of Dublin, Ireland called U2. And what a lot of people don't know, like a lot of people are attracted to U2 because of their political beliefs or their activism or whatever else. But back in 1981, 1982, they had this album called October, which was just a complete praise to God. And in fact, every U2 song has a piece of scripture in it. You have to look for it, but it's there. And they refuse to be called a Christian band, but they're probably the biggest Christian band in the world. And And so Bono, for me, had a huge influence on just my approach to praise music. And I mean, even today, when I listen to some contemporary music, I hear so much U2 in Hillsong or in Casting Crowns or in Phil Wickham. I mean, it's all there. And if you challenge those guys, they're like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, they were the influence.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they were it. I mean, because for a whole bunch of us, that was going to a U2 show is not a rock concert. It's like going to church.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's like whether you realize it or not, the things that you take in, your diet is more than, people say this, but your diet is more than just food. It's also things that you're thinking on, things that you're reading, things that you're hearing, and subconsciously, whether you realize it or not, that's going to have an effect on you. And I think that's definitely the case within music. So that's super interesting. Grandparents leaving a legacy for both of you. That's really cool. So kind of my next area focus is obviously we're talking a lot about faith, freedom, free enterprise, politics. And I kind of just wanted to ask really simply, how have you seen like a shift in politics over the course of your lifetime, but maybe even the time that just you've been more both of you have just been more invested in politics? Like I've talked to my parents about this a few times as like for them, their grandparents, they never talked about just legislation, things like presidency. They would never talk about who they voted for. And that's my personal experience, what I've heard. So I'm just curious what you guys think as far as the time that you've been in politics. How have you seen things ebb and flow and shift, and just as time has gone on in the world? Like what are changes that you've seen as time's gone on since your experience in the political realm?
It's gotten way nastier.
Yeah.
It's just the vitriol is
I think
is
we're both
disappointing.
Yeah, I think we're both on the same page on that. The personal attacks in politics has gone way overboard. And
it's also the us versus them mentality. It used to be that you'd had politicians that had really strong friendships across the aisle. You look at Reagan and Tip O'Neill. You look at Ted Kennedy and Orrin Hatch. I mean, those guys were insanely close friends.
Yeah.
But completely on opposite ends of the political spectrum. I mean, it's even in the House when Shattuck was there, he had friends on the Democrat side. Bob Stump was a great example of someone who had great bipartisan ties. And it's just become such I say it's a game, but it's way more serious than that, because it's the game of politics now is who can I vilify in order to appease my base. For the Democrats, it's making fun of Cruz. For Republicans, it's making fun of AOC. Washington has just become a cesspool of vitriol. And there's probably some bipartisanship still. I think Senator Sinema has friends on both sides, but it's pretty rare, I think, or at least it's not as visible. If there are friends, they probably hide that stuff.
What's really interesting is that David Schweikert, who we've had on this podcast, has said to me very explicitly, and I've been with him when it's happened. So he will be, with a friend of his who's very liberal, be having a conversation, agreeing, disagreeing, what have you. And then that same person says, I think you might have said this on the podcast too. I have to go out in front of the cameras now and vilify your side because I have to raise money back home based on what I'm saying.
Right.
And that's the other thing about politics, that money, the 2-year fundraising cycle, having to raise millions and millions of dollars in a very short period of time, which if you're an incumbent is a lot easier, but you still have to do it. Part of that is for those, especially in competitive races, is getting on, the talk show circuit. That means either going on MSNBC if you're on the left, or going on Fox News if you're on the right, and vilifying the other side, and then kind of crawling back into your office and trying to have relationships with people. Because one truism is still true in D.C. Nothing gets done without relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And John Dester said that on the podcast last week. I mean, the relationships still have to exist. So you can vilify Ted Cruz all you want, but certain things are not going to get done without his support.
Right.
So you can vilify AOC all you want. And we did our share of that in one of our podcasts, and that was a lot of fun. However, there still needs to be, it's all a fun in sport, but there needs to be some humility and some recognition that these are people. You brought up John Shattuck and when he was in Congress. I remember when we had a little get together when he was retiring, and Ann Kirkpatrick came, and she said and who's a Democratic congresswoman from Arizona and representing now Tucson. Back then when she was still representing Flagstaff, and she said some amazing things about John. And it's that type of friendship, bipartisanship that's just missing.
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, vitriol. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to say it started getting really bad with Bill Clinton.
Okay.
That's when it began. If there's a marker, I would say that presidency is when it happened. And it got a little bit. I mean, it calmed down a little bit with Bush, but on the left it was still pretty bad.
Yeah.
It went full bore with Obama, and then with Trump, it went off the rails.
Yep.
Yeah, it seems like, I think this is common known fact too, but I think especially with the introduction of social media, it seems like, I think one of our previous guests even mentioned how it's kind of just become an echo chamber of when you're listening to the same news sources or seeing stuff on social media and algorithms that produce like content, and you're seeing all the same. It's like just fueling the fire, it seems like.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, kind of with news sources.
Well, Twitter's for twits. I mean, it's just
Such a
twits.
dumpster fire.
Yeah.
We're on Twitter, so don't hate it too bad.
No, but you can be semi-anonymous on Twitter and say whatever you want, and then do whatever. So
Yeah. Yeah, kind of with news sources, I wanted to ask, just how do you navigate? Obviously, you just mentioned MSNBC, Fox, and everything. There's so many news sources out there. How do you navigate and filter your news? Like, obviously, there's bias in lots of news sources. How do you navigate and filter your different news sources and come to your own conclusions based off of what you see and hear and read?
that's a great question.
Yeah, it is a great question. I don't watch TV, so I very rarely see TV news, and I don't really watch Fox or CNN or MSNBC. I mean, I'll watch CNN on election night, and I pick CNN because I want to see how the left is seeing the world.
Sure.
Right? From daily news consumption, I mean, my go-to is Wall Street Journal. Obviously, I'll peruse the Republic, Arizona Republic, just see what's happening locally. And I'll read the Washington Post and the New York Times. Those are the ones that I have subscriptions to, I guess. I guess that's where I go.
No newspaper anymore.
No,
Well,
it's all
online.
online.
It's all on your little supercomputer. So,
Yep.
Yeah, I guess I read the Wall Street Journal probably cover to cover every day, but I start with the opinion page just to see their take on different issues. Sometimes I agree, sometimes I disagree. I have a subscription to the Washington Post. Always read the Post. Politico. I actually like Politico.
And actually, I failed to mention that I get some of the daily newsletters that like Politico, Axios,
Yeah.
AM with Mike Allen, who used to do Political Playbook. So I get Playbook and
Do you read The Hill?
Not much.
Yeah, I still have like updates pop in from time to time. But I'm a big opinion reader, so I try to read Real Clear Politics, and because I enjoy getting they'll print a take from the right, a take from the left, and on an issue, and just you can kind of scroll down, and whatever issue is a hot button for you. In terms of TV, in the morning, we have on the Today Show.
All right.
And I don't consider that news. I call it Hoda news because
Kathy Lee and Hoda.
oh yeah, it's just it's not news. And then my wife, rightfully so, will criticize me from watching too much Fox News. She goes, "Well, that's Fox News," and I don't really watch a lot of Fox News at all. I like there's two shows that I think do a decent job. One is Special Report with Brett Baer. I think does a decent job of just recapping what's happened in DC that day, and then doing a panel which can be interesting or not interesting. And then over the last 5, 6, 7 years, I've gotten to know Tucker Carlson fairly well with an event I put together in DC, and so I'll watch or listen to him later in the evening. On occasion, but not all the time. And then what I've really gotten into is some of the Wall Street Journal podcasts that they have. Potomac Watch with Bill McGurn and Kim Strassel is excellent, and that comes about twice a week. And then they have their daily sort of updates. And what's great now, I can get them in my car because my car has like a Wall Street Journal app. So I'll be driving home and I'll get sort of a recap of what's happened. So it's good.
Yeah, those are all really good answers and different sources. I appreciate that you guys get a variety and it's not just one. So I appreciate those. And some of those I've never heard of. So I'm definitely going to look into them
Well,
more.
you know, also is a great piece, and more people turning it is the Federalist.
Yeah, Federalist, Ben Dominic has done an amazing
Ben's
job.
done a great job, and from both opinion and some hard news, and I enjoy reading the Federalist.
That's a good one. And I also do National Review.
Well, I've been subscribing to National Review since I was 14 years old.
No way.
Yeah. So
One of the commonalities we have.
my
Agree on something.
so my dad got 2 magazines sent to our house when I was a kid, Forbes and Sports Illustrated, and I would steal his Forbes. And then I came to him and said, I want to get a subscription to National Review. And he looked at me like I had 2 heads. And I remember my first issue of National Review showed up, and the writing and the opinion pieces, I mean, it was more than I was prepared for at 14 years old.
Yeah.
And then I got a book for first time subscriber, William F. Buckley's Right Reason. And I just thought it was the coolest thing in the world.
That's awesome.
And I've been an NR subscriber ever since.
That's awesome. You mentioned nothing gets done without relationships in the political world. I think also that's definitely true of life. And I kind of wanted to just ask, recently I've been really thinking about mentorships and going after people, and I feel like there's so much wisdom out there. Even a verse I've been thinking on is Proverbs 16:16, and it says, how much better to get wisdom than gold, to get understanding is to be chosen rather than silver. But I just think I know that there's so much wisdom out there, and I've just been trying to personally navigate how do I get more wisdom from other people that have been in the world longer than me and have more life experience. And so I kind of wanted to ask, how maybe just your personal experience going through life, how have you navigated building relationships and mentorships? So maybe you meet somebody that you think they got it going on, like they know their stuff and you want to become friends with them. How do you navigate becoming a closer friend with them, or even like just the practical elements of just asking them out to coffee, and like how do you continue those friendships and those relationships to become tighter knit and just develop more networking in a sense too? I know it's a broad question, but
That is a broad question.
yeah. Or like a specific example in your life of somebody that you've asked to be a mentor, or somebody that's taken you under their wing and that's been influential for you, and how that relationship has worked.
You know, my dad always told me that everyone puts their pants on the same way.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter who you meet, as enamored as you might be by them, they have their own faults, their own failures, their own issues. And because I was always amazed at how connected sort of he was in all these relationships that he had. And so I've never really forgotten that. So I've always, whenever I've met someone, I've always just treated them like a person. And if there's a connection, or if I feel like I want to learn more, I think being fearless, being persistent, has its virtues. And so so many of my relationships with folks is just me picking up the phone after I've met them and say, hey, do you have time for coffee? Or can I come see you? And 9 times out of 10, they'll say, yeah, sure. Yeah, what would you like to do? And for a lot of, on the political side especially, that's how I've gained most of my relationships, is meeting somebody, being in DC, picking up the phone, sending an email, hey, I'm in town, would love to go grab lunch with you, follow up on our conversation from like 2 years ago or something. And I've just networked and gained a lot of insight and friendships that way.
Okay.
It's a great question, and one that I feel like I was pretty lucky in that I didn't necessarily have to pursue some of the best mentors that I had. I just happened, John Shadig has been a huge mentor for me in my life. I mean, I was 23 years old when I went to work for his campaign, and so working for his campaign and then him becoming a member of Congress gave me avenues to people that I would have never had, because I was a staffer to a congressman. And so, people, if I wanted to talk to them, they would talk to me. I felt very lucky by that. But
But also you knew what you were talking about. And I think
sometimes.
But I think there's value in actually knowing your stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But he did a very good job of mentoring me, just by being a great boss. And when I say great, I mean challenging. I mean, he pushed me, and that was exactly what I needed. He had a very close friend who's now a close friend of mine, Alan McGuire, who has been a phenomenal mentor. Just a guy so wise, just great advice every time we talk. And because of the time that Shadig and Alan McGuire put in to me in forming my early days, I've just made it a practice that if anyone wants to talk, I'll take the time. I mean, if they call and say, I want to pick your brain, and I'll try to as often as I can, particularly young people who are, want to get involved in politics or whatever.
I think, in terms of influences in my approach, and definitely my dad, and seeing how he took every meeting. People out of the blue would call him up, and who he maybe met once, and they wanted some advice. And then he had a really good friend who was probably my biggest mentor other than my dad, a guy by the name of Dave Sitton, who was the rugby coach for the University of Arizona for 36 years and was actually our first vice president of marketing back in the Golden Eagle days. And I just remembered he passed away in 2013, but he was always there, and he was always trying to instill wisdom in me. And the way he approached people, too, was really unique. I mean, he commanded a room. He made everybody feel really good. That was his gift. He ran for Congress, lost to Martha McSally in the primary. But and there's reasons for that. That's another podcast.
Yeah.
But those. I mean, just fatherly influences for sure, and the way is I think a huge part of getting over those fears of approaching other people and looking to engage.
Yeah, those are really good points. Thank you for saying that. I think something I've been trying to overcome recently is just like that idea that if you don't ask, you never know what's going to happen. Like if you don't shoot, you can't score. I just think like overcoming that fear of asking, and I think people are so much more willing to give than you expect. And I heard this leadership like podcast recently, and it was somebody saying too, like when you ask somebody to pick their brain, it's like when you ask that question, it's phrasing it almost in a way like you don't have anything to give either, and you want to pick someone's brain and get their opinions and stuff, but like you have something to offer them too. So it's like cool to go into that conversation and have an expectation you're going to get something out of it, and just go into it very humbly and seek it out. If you don't ask, you don't know.
Right.
So
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the reasons that I'll meet with people who I don't know or who want to pick my brain is that I'll always learn something. And, one of the things I've said to a lot of people in Washington particularly is that you need to treat everybody well,
Yeah.
from top down all the way to the intern, because you never know when you're going to need that person. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've had former staffers of mine that were below me, so to speak, in the hierarchy, that have gone on to do really remarkable things and be in positions that are like, hey, that's really impressive. And I mean, I've never really needed anything, but if I did, I could call them because I wasn't an asshole to them.
Yeah.
You bring up a really great point about even just navigating Washington, right? Navigating politics in general. You treat everyone the same. You treat the staffer the same as you do the member, because they actually can do more for you than the member.
Yeah. Particularly the scheduler.
So whenever, especially the scheduler. So whenever I walk into a congressional office, I always make sure, like, literally the person sitting behind the desk is an intern or whatever. And, hi, how are you? How's your day going? Where are you from? All those things. I'm here to see the congressman or congresswoman, and ask them about them. And invariably, things go much smoother for you in the office. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a congressional office and you get some, gamut of people coming in, and they treat the staff horribly.
Oh, yeah.
And then they wonder why they're not meeting with the member.
Right. Yep. And good members defend their staff to the death.
Absolutely.
I mean, Shattuck was, man, if somebody got on his staff, he was in their face. He was very, very defensive.
No, absolutely.
And it was great for morale.
Well, and I was an intern. I interned for a United States senator. So I got to see that, and I got to be, I remember answering the phones at the patent subcommittee of the judiciary, people yelling at me about things I knew nothing about. But, the senator will maybe get back to you. Thank you, click.
yeah.
We'll see if we can get back to you.
Right.
We'll see if you'll get that appointment.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But that's true in business. That's true with anything, and a lot of people forget that.
Mm-hmm.
Very well said. I kind of just have kind of a fun thing just to maybe wrap it up a little bit.
This has been great.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
need to make this a common feature.
Yeah, I'm in. Kind of my last thing on just general things, getting to know you guys better. What's kind of like maybe one or two like simple pleasures in life that you enjoy that are like simple things? So like for me, I enjoy drinking my coffee in the morning and just having like a few minutes in the morning before the day gets crazy, before I look at my phone. I always have my hot coffee, even in Arizona in the heat. I love my hot coffee in the morning. I drink it and like have my quiet time in the morning before the day starts. So what are maybe some of those like simple pleasures, simple things in life? Maybe that's time with your family or whatever it may be that you just enjoy.
We have a porch, which is unusual for Arizona. And my wife bought some rocking chairs
Okay.
to go on the porch. And one of the very simple pleasures I enjoy is precisely that, sitting on the porch in the morning, especially if it's a nice morning, with my coffee, with my dog, and just watching the world go by, just listening to the sounds of the morning. There's something to be said for that.
Yeah. Is that front or back porch?
It's a front porch.
Okay.
And we have a little courtyard, and we have these kind of cool, comfy little rocking chairs. And when the weather was still nice, I would go out in the evenings and watch kind of the sunset and just be rocking. And my wife would come out and go, "What are you doing?" Just watching the world go by.
That's perfect.
Enjoying the weather under 90 degrees.
Yeah, back then it was like in the 70s still. And I'm like,
Right.
this is perfect.
I think that, well, for me right now, having Vincent, I get up early in the morning with Vincent. He's just over a month old now. And just holding him, just sitting there. Usually drinking either coffee. I do a couple cups of coffee first. And I drink it on the side. I don't drink right over him because I don't want to spill hot coffee on him. I would get in a lot of trouble for that. Ooh, I'm flaking out because of my sunburn. But I also love my guilty pleasure is Monster energy drink,
Okay.
the Ultra Zero
Oh, my.
blue can. Oh my gosh, I love it. I don't know. It's an acquired taste, but man, you should see my garage fridge. It's usually
You know
jam
how
packed.
bad that
Stocked.
stuff is
Oh, I'm
for
sure
you?
it is, but it
You'd
is.
be better off just drinking coffee.
Well, I do drink coffee.
Don't spill Monster on your kid.
Well, I don't want to
Who
do
knows
that.
what'll happen?
Yeah, right. But yeah. So
I see a common theme with coffee. I think we need more coffee around here. If I'm
Do you
not
have a rocking
mistaken.
I do not have a rock. Well, I've got a glider, the
Okay.
inside. It's
Yeah.
for rocking the baby. But no, I need to get a rocking
We're
chair.
old enough now that,
I need to
like-
get
There
a
you
rocking
go.
chair for outside.
There you
That's a
go.
good idea.
Well, those are the main things I have. Thank you guys for talking with me today and letting me on the podcast. Never thought I'd see the day, but here I am.
There you go.
Yeah.
She did great.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thanks for being here on our first episode or version of
Deep
Thoughts with Avery,
Avery.
the intern. Thanks, Avery.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
bless.